Hello everyone, my name is Iavor Bojinov and I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School where I work on data science operations and strategy. Today I'm going to tell you about the next generation of business experimentation. This is what digital native companies are transitioning to. And unlike the first generation, this approach is dynamic, fully integrated, and all-encompassing. It also turns out to overcome some of the challenges that many companies face when first adopting experimentation. I first noticed the transition when I worked at LinkedIn as a data scientist, leading their causal inference group. Before I started the job, like all statisticians, I thought companies just used the basic structure of experimentation that Fisher and others developed in the 1930s. To give you a sense of how modern or bleeding edge that is, at the time people drove cars like this, and Gone with the Wind had just come out. Of course, to some extent I was right. They were using the basic framework, but they were applying it in new ways that exposed the limitations of these 100-year-old designs that many of you are, of course, familiar with. To make things concrete, let's walk through a standard A/B testing example. Imagine a team of machine learning engineers develops a new ranking algorithm. To test its efficacy, the team randomly splits the company's user base into two equal-sized groups. The first receives the new experience, or the algorithm, and the second receives the old experience. The team then carefully monitors their customers' reactions across numerous different business metrics, and after a couple of weeks makes a call on whether or not the new experience should be widely deployed. Now, there are of course many generalizations of this idea. For example, there could be multiple new algorithms, not just one. But regardless of the details, this type of A/B testing brings two obvious benefits. It allows companies to quantify the value that a product or a change brings to its customers, and managers can use this information to augment their decision-making around deployment and investment opportunities. Unfortunately, it turns out there are some limitations to this approach. In particular, the initial adoption of A/B testing creates operational complexities by introducing a second track for making decisions, forcing managers to argue over which changes should undergo experimentation and how to align decision-making. A/B testing is also somewhat static and slow. It requires having an idea, building a prototype, and then waiting for a considerable amount of time before making any further changes. I think of this generation of experimentation akin to waterfall product development. You have a design and you don't want to change it. Finally, the adoption of experimentation has created a debate around whether the practice encourages incremental innovation. Some recent studies have shown that's not the case, but the debate still goes on. Now, what I saw when I was on LinkedIn and since then at several other large technology companies is the emergence of a solution. And don't worry, it's not stopping to experiment. It's actually exactly the opposite. Solution is treating every change as an experiment through the adoption of dynamic panel experiments. Now, some people call these phase releases or controlled rollouts, but regardless of the name, the practice fundamentally changes how products are developed and evaluated. Let me give you an example. Again, we want to evaluate our new ranking algorithm, but this time we'll use a sequence of experiments. In the first, we'll assign a small group of users to the new experience. We'll measure the effect, and if everything looks good, we'll move some more folks over. We'll again measure the effect, and if we're finally happy with this version, then we'll widely deploy it. So, what I just described to you is the vanilla version of panel experiments, which generally allow experimental units to switch between treatment and control over time, whilst allowing past treatments to impact current outcomes. Now, coming back to the example, I'm sure you're all wondering, well, yeah, what if the effect's negative? Then we would simply move everyone back to the old experience. That's why the first iteration is often called the risk mitigation step, because it allows us to try out our change on a small group of users and quickly gauge their reaction. Alright, so we now know what to do if the effect's really positive or really negative. What if it's somewhere in the middle? Well, Since we're using a sequence of experiments, we can use the information from the risk mitigation step to improve our design by introducing a learning step. Let me give you an example from LinkedIn. There, my collaborator really was testing a ranking algorithm, and the results in the risk mitigation stage were positive for most customers, but not all. After a careful analysis, the team realized that this was due to how one of the model parameters was trained. And so they changed this, and in the estimation step, they saw a fairly sizable improvement in their main business metric. Now, without the move to dynamic panel experiments, the team would have released a good, but not the best possible version of the algorithm. Indeed, when we analyzed over 1,000 experiments on LinkedIn, we estimate that the use of dynamic panel experiments led to an additional 20% improvement in LinkedIn's primary business metric. So to summarize, this transition brings three major benefits. The first is operational clarity. By moving to a model in which every change goes through a sequence of experiments, companies can move past the debate of should this be an experiment and just focus on building better products for their customers. It's also much easier to sustain a 100% goal compared with, say, 60 or 80. Second, the sequential nature of panel experiments speeds up the pace of innovation by allowing teams to incorporate learnings from early iterations without having to restart the whole process. Indeed, over the past few years, I've developed a statistical framework to allow for the valid analysis of these types of dynamic or learning experiments. I think of this type of experimentation as the heart of agile product development, as it encourages learning and rapid innovation. Third, by starting the experiment with a small group of users, the company can drastically reduce the risk of innovation. Alright, so this all sounds great, but I bet you're wondering, how can we get there? Well, there are three foundations that are necessary to successfully transition to the next level of experimentation: a robust data platform, an agile experimentation platform, and investment in people and processes. A good data platform is essential to the success of experimentation. In many organizations, for example, this happened both at LinkedIn and Yelp, the development of the data platform was catalyzed by the firm's desire to run valid experiments. But I think that data platform should come first. A good data platform has three key pillars: an analytics engine that allows for metric definition, dashboarding, and near real-time monitoring from a single source of truth. It also has a compliance layer that ensures that all user data satisfies the highest level of privacy and limits access to individual user data. This part of the data platform has become particularly important with the rise of privacy regulations like GDPR and other ones. And finally, the whole platform needs to be consistent and guarantee that the data is up to date and correct. Now, digital native companies here have an advantage because they're likely already collecting the data and storing it in a way that facilitates the creation of these types of platforms. Traditional companies, on the other hand, face a big hurdle as they typically store data in silos with little communication. One successful strategy employed by P&G and others is to start small with a key set of partners, quickly show the value, and then focus on scaling the solution. Of course, it should be no surprise that you need a flexible experimentation platform. Typically, a good experimentation platform allows for the configuration and execution of experiments and easily integrates into existing processes. It should also have automated analysis and a simple-to-use UI. Many companies here face a choice: build their own experimentation platform or purchase an existing solution like Split. In my experience, for most companies, purchasing is the way to go, as it's substantially cheaper, safer, and, believe me, a lot faster. Finally, and honestly, most importantly, you need to have the right people and processes. In my experience, this is the hardest pillar to transform. It requires strong leadership vision and an adjustment of the leader's role. In particular, The job of the leader should be to set the vision, the direction, and the overall evaluation criteria. They also need to ensure that employees are empowered to make deployment decisions, trusting the data and looking at results with a great deal of humility. Now, this will create an environment ready to embrace the experimentation mindset. At this stage, companies need to invest in educating their employees to build up knowledge and expertise. Here, what I found to be particularly helpful is emphasizing that experimentation is a customer-centric approach that allows developers to rapidly discern user preferences whilst de-risking innovation. There's a simple acronym that I teach my MBA students on how to drive adoption of any data science tool, but it works particularly well for experimentation. EAT for adoption. Educate to increase knowledge, automate to reduce switching costs, and build trust to facilitate the transformation. Of course, this process doesn't happen overnight. So I wanted to leave you with a model for how to grow all three foundations in a way that enhances each but also balances them. The crawl stage is about developing the fundamentals of running an experiment. You can get started with a data platform that essentially consists of a few standardized key metrics like revenue or sales. As for the experimentation platform, start by running an AA test. This is an experiment where the treatment and control are the same, and you can use this just to test the whole infrastructure. Then run your first few experiments. I found it helpful to partner with folks and product teams that have experience working for a company that heavily used experimentation. These folks are great early adopters and can help evangelize experimentation. At this point, companies typically measure success by tracking the number of experiments that were run. After building a steady foundation, companies can begin to transition to the walking phase. This phase requires developing the capabilities to regularly run many experiments. Think of this as the mass consumption stage. To get there, leaders must create and nurture a data-driven culture of humility that is ready to embrace experimentation. It also requires experimentation expertise to diffuse through the organization, so education is key. At this point, the data platform needs to be able to handle a high number of standardized metrics, which are automatically updated and regulated. The experimentation platform also has to be ready to handle the increase in demand. This typically requires moving to a decentralized model. This is the time for companies to transition away from tracking how many experiments they've run and really focus on successful experiments or the impact of the experiment. Now, you might be wondering, how long does this take? How long does it take to get from crawling to walking? Well, the answer is it depends. I've worked with large traditional organizations that have spent 5 to 6 years in the crawl phase, and they're still not ready to mature to the walk phase. And I've also seen, small tech companies jump from the crawl to the walk in a matter of months. As I mentioned earlier, the main hurdle here is people and processes. The run stage is the final stage, and this is what this talk was all about. It's the point at which experimentation is fully integrated into the company's operations, and every product change, large and small, goes through a sequence of experiments before being deployed. The data platform is now a core part of the firm's operating model. The experimentation platform is fully automated, and experimentation is a decentralized process that everyone participates in. At this stage, experimental results are not just used to augment decision-making for the current feature, but they're also used to inform future product decisions. In a sense, experimentation has become the DNA of the organization. Success is then measured by experimentation velocity and learning rates. This is what the future of business experimentation looks like. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions or would like to discuss what a transition might look like in your organization, please reach out to me. Thank you.